In 1978, a widow named Maria Elena Gutierrez lived in a one-room apartment in Ecatepec, outside Mexico City, on a pension of 800 pesos a month. She cooked the same pot of lentils every Monday and ate from it until Wednesday. On Thursday, she made frijoles de olla. Her doctor told her she was healthier than women 20 years younger. That meal is number 20 on this list. Number 9 costs less than 20 pesos to make. Number 1 kept ranch families alive through winters in the Sierra Madre. Now, this is not medical advice, and I'm not telling you to change what you eat. This is just a look at how things used to be. These 25 meals were designed for one thing: survival. They fed people eating alone at kitchen tables that seated 4. Subscribe and stay with me. Here are 25 forgotten Mexican one-pot meals for seniors living alone. Number 25, sopa de fideo. A bag of thin vermicelli noodles cost less than 5 pesos. A can of tomatoes cost about the same. Together, with some water and a clove of garlic, they became sopa de fideo. The noodles were toasted in a tablespoon of oil first until they turned golden brown and filled your kitchen with a nutty smell. Then the tomato went in, then water. Then you waited. In 20 minutes, the pot held a warm, soft tomato red soup that stuck to your ribs and filled the stomach with almost nothing. Grandmothers across Jalisco and Guanajuato made this 3 times a week for decades. It was never a side dish. It was the meal. The smell of toasting noodles in oil was the sound of a kitchen that still had someone cooking in it. For a person living alone, sopa de fideo means your stove is still being used and the house still has a pulse. When the fideo stops, the kitchen dies. Number 24, frijoles de olla con epazote. A handful of dried pinto beans, water, a chunk of onion, and 3 leaves of epazote. That was the whole recipe. The epazote went in near the end. It changed everything. Without epazote, beans taste like beans. With it, they taste like the earth they grew in. A grandmother in San Luis Potosi would put the pot on at sunrise and eat from it for 4 days. 1 kilo of dried beans costs about 30 pesos. That kilo produces enough food for 12 meals. For a senior on a pension, frijoles de olla is not a recipe. It is an economic strategy. The pot sits on the stove, and every time hunger comes, you fill a bowl. Simple and cheap and dignifying. Nobody talks about frijoles de olla because nobody photographs a pot of brown beans, but that pot has kept more people alive in Mexico than any dish in any restaurant. Number 23, arroz rojo con huevo. White rice was toasted in oil until each grain was golden, then simmered in a tomato broth made from blending 2 tomatoes, a clove of garlic, and a quarter of an onion. When the rice was done and all the liquid had been absorbed, a fried egg went on top. That was your dinner. The rice cost almost nothing. The egg cost 4 pesos. The tomatoes grew in the backyard. This was the weeknight supper of every small-town Mexican household for half a century. It fills the stomach. It provides protein. It costs less than a bus ride. The egg makes the difference between eating starch and eating a meal. That small addition of protein is what keeps a body working when it needs to keep working. Your grandmother knew that without ever reading a nutrition label. She didn't need a label. She had 50 years of feeding people on nothing. Number 22, caldo de habas. Dried fava beans simmered in water with a few dried chilies, a piece of onion, and a branch of epazote. The beans broke down after about 90 minutes into a thick, earthy soup that was almost a porridge. In the highlands of Puebla and Tlaxcala, Caldo de habas was the cold weather meal of campesino families who grew the beans themselves. A pot of this soup heated your body from the inside. It feeds and it warms. 1 kilo of dried habas costs about 40 pesos and produces 8 generous bowls. That is less than 5 pesos per meal. No restaurant in Mexico can match that price. No factory can replicate that warmth. The soup works because the bean does all the labor. All the cook has to do is wait. You put the pot on, you sit down, you let the flame do what your hands are too tired to do. Number 21st, lentejas con plátano macho. Lentils do not need soaking. They cook in 30 minutes. That alone makes them the most practical legume in any kitchen, especially a kitchen where you are tired. Use brown lentils, water, a diced carrot, a clove of garlic, and a tomato. Simmer until soft. Then comes the element that separates Mexican lentils from every other version on earth. Sliced platano, macho fried in a little oil until golden, dropped into the pot at the end. In Veracruz and Oaxaca, a grandmother would fry the plantain and put it on the side for the grandchildren to fight over. For a senior eating alone, the plantain is the part that turns a plain pot of lentils into something worth sitting down for. A reason to set a plate. A reason to eat at the table instead of standing at the counter with a spoon and a pot. Number 20. Chilaquiles in salsa verde. Yesterday's tortillas, a pot of salsa verde made from 6 tomatillos, 2 serranos, and half an onion. That is the meal. Your stale tortillas are torn into pieces and dropped into the simmering salsa until they soften and absorb the liquid. Maybe a spoonful of crema on top. Maybe a crumble of queso fresco. In the 1970s and the 1980s, every kitchen in central Mexico had a comal with stale tortillas and a pot of salsa on the back burner. Chilaquiles were breakfast, lunch, and sometimes dinner. They cost nothing because they were made from what was already there. For a senior living alone, chilaquiles in salsa verde are the fastest hot meal possible, 10 minutes from stove to table. The tortillas that would otherwise go to waste become food. Now, that's the engineering of Mexican cooking. Nothing is thrown away. Everything becomes a meal. Your grandmother didn't call it sustainability. She called it Tuesday. Number 19, enfrijoladas. When the tortillas from yesterday went stiff and the beans from the night before sat cold in the pot, nothing got thrown away in your kitchen. The leftover beans were blended into a smooth, dark sauce. Each stale tortilla was dipped into that sauce, folded and laid on a plate. Maybe a little crumbled queso fresco on top, maybe nothing at all. That was enfrijoladas, a meal made entirely from 2 things that were already leftovers. It cost nothing. In Oaxaca, they perfected this into something extraordinary using black beans with avocado leaf. But in the survival version, there were no garnishes. There was a plate of bean-soaked tortillas and a person sitting alone at the table. The meal is free. The ingredients are already in the house. All it asks is that someone blend the beans and dip the tortillas. That takes 5 minutes. 5 minutes between waste and a meal. Now here's the thing. Every one of these meals solves the same problem, and it is not the problem most people think. The problem is not hunger. A person living alone can eat crackers and survive. The problem is dignity. Cooking a pot of lentils means the kitchen is alive. Setting a plate at the table means the house is still a home. Half of seniors in Mexico skip at least 1 meal a day. Not because there is no food, because cooking for one feels pointless. Why heat a pot for one person? Why wash a dish nobody else will see? These meals answer that question because the pot is for you. The plate is for you. And sitting down to eat something warm that came from a stove is the difference between existing and living. Number 18, sopa de tortilla casera, not the restaurant version with avocado and crema and 3 kinds of cheese, the home version. Stale tortillas cut into strips and fried until crisp, a broth made from 3 tomatoes, 2 dried chilies, garlic and onion, all blended and strained. The tortilla strips go into the broth and soften slightly while keeping a chew. A squeeze of lime. That is it. It looked elegant. It tasted rich. It cost almost nothing. For a senior cooking alone, sopa de tortilla casera is a meal that looks and tastes like more than it is. That matters. That is the secret of sopa de tortilla casera. It doesn't just feed you, it reminds you that you're worth cooking for. And that reminder, sitting in a bowl of warm broth with crispy tortilla strips floating on top, is worth every minute at the stove. Number 17, arroz con pollo en una olla. 1 pot arroz con pollo for 2, 1 chicken thigh, 1 cup of rice, 2 tomatoes, half an onion, a clove of garlic, water, 1 pot. The chicken goes in first with the onion and garlic until it browns. Then the rice goes in and toasts in the chicken fat. The tomato is blended and poured over. Water covers everything. The lid goes on. 35 minutes later, the pot holds a complete meal. Protein, starch, and vegetable in a single pot with a single burner. In Sinaloa and Sonora, arroz con pollo was the Wednesday meal in every household. 1 chicken thigh cost about 15 pesos and fed 1 person twice. For a senior living alone, this meal solves the hardest problem in solo cooking: leftovers. The pot makes 2 servings, dinner tonight, lunch tomorrow, 2 meals from 1 effort on the stove. That is the math that makes solo cooking possible. Number 16, caldo de papa con chile. Potatoes, water, dried guajillo chile, that is your entire recipe. 3 potatoes, peeled and cubed. 1 dried chile, torn open, seeds removed, soaked in hot water, and blended with a clove of garlic. The chili sauce goes into the pot with the potatoes and water and simmers until the potatoes are tender. 25 minutes total. The broth turns a deep amber color, and the potatoes absorb the chili until they glow. 5 pesos total. For a senior on a fixed income, this is the meal that proves poverty does not have to taste poor. The chile gives the broth a warmth that goes beyond temperature, and the potatoes keep the body full for hours. That combination costs less than a pack of gum, and it feeds you better than most things that cost 20 times as much. Number 15, verdolagas en salsa verde. Verdolagas grow in sidewalk cracks, in vacant lots, anywhere without anyone planting them. They really grow everywhere. In Mexico, calling someone come verdolagas, a purslane eater, was an insult that meant someone was desperately poor. Verdolagas turn out to be one of the most nutritious plants on earth. Rich in omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin A, and iron, a grandmother might have picked them from the edge of the yard on the way in from hanging laundry. Stewed in salsa verde made from tomatillos and serranos, the leaves softened into the sauce and the stems kept a slight crunch. The whole thing had a lemony, slightly sour flavor, free, nutritious, and ready in 15 minutes. For a senior living alone, verdolagas are the meal that costs nothing because the ingredient grows without permission. The shame of eating free food kept people away from verdolagas for years. The shame was not justified. The plant was right. Number 14, fideo loco. A bag of thin vermicelli noodles and whatever else was in the kitchen. That was the recipe. The noodles are toasted in oil first, then covered with a tomato broth. After that, anything goes into your pot. A diced potato, a handful of ground beef if there is any, a few leaves of spinach going soft in the crisper. Nothing. The noodles absorbed whatever they were given and turned it into your dinner. In the Rio Grande Valley, in Brownsville and McAllen, fideo was not a side dish. It was the meal families ate when school was out and there was no money for anything else. For a senior eating alone, fideo loco is permission to cook without a plan. Whatever is in the refrigerator goes in the pot. You open the refrigerator, grab whatever has not gone bad, and throw it in the pot. The noodles do not judge, they absorb. The meals on this list share something that no restaurant menu and no frozen dinner can replicate. They were invented by people who had almost nothing and who refused to eat badly because of it. A pot of caldo de papa with one dried chile is not gourmet cooking. Nobody would call it that. But it is intelligent cooking. It extracts the maximum flavor and nutrition from the minimum investment. And that is what a grandmother does. She does not follow trends. She does not consult cookbooks. She opens your cupboard, sees 3 potatoes and a dried chile, and builds a meal that fills the stomach and warms the soul. That skill, that ability to see a meal where someone else sees bare shelves, is disappearing, not because it failed. Number 13, entomatadas, stale tortillas dipped in a thick tomato sauce made from roasting 4 tomatoes, a clove of garlic, and a dried chili on a comal, then blending until smooth. The sauce is poured into a pan. Each tortilla is dragged through it, folded and arranged on a plate. Crumbled cheese on top if available. Nothing if not. Entomatadas are the forgotten sister of enchiladas. Same concept, but simpler, cheaper, and faster. No meat required, no complicated sauces, just tomatoes and tortillas, 2 ingredients that every Mexican kitchen has at all times. In Michoacan and Guerrero, grandmothers made entomatadas for breakfast when the house had nothing else. For a senior eating alone, entomatadas are a hot meal in 15 minutes using ingredients that are already on the counter. That speed matters when cooking feels like a chore. The faster the meal comes together, the more likely you are to eat. Number 12, caldo tlalpeno, chicken, chickpeas, chipotle, and vegetables in a clear broth. The smoke of the chipotle gives this soup a depth that most simple broths cannot match. 1 chicken leg, a can of chickpeas, a chipotle pepper in adobo sauce, a carrot, a zucchini, and a branch of epazote if available. Everything goes in 1 pot with water and simmers for 40 minutes. In Mexico City, caldo tlalpeno was the soup abuelas made when someone in the family was sick. The broth was believed to restore strength. For a senior living alone, caldo tlalpeno is medicine disguised as dinner. The pot makes 3 servings, 3 days of eating from 1 hour of cooking. Here's why that matters. That ratio is what makes 1-pot meals the architecture of solo survival. 1 afternoon of effort buys you 3 days of not having to think about food. For a senior whose energy comes and goes, that trade-off is everything. Number 11, papas con chorizo. Diced potatoes scrambled with chorizo in a single skillet. The chorizo releases its own fat, so no additional oil is needed. The potatoes absorb the red grease and turn a deep brick color. A warm flour tortilla on the side, that is the meal. For a senior living alone, this meal provides the illusion of abundance. The red grease makes a small amount of meat look like more than it is. The potatoes stretch the protein. The tortilla completes the plate. Total cost under 30 pesos. Total cooking time under 20 minutes. For someone whose hands are stiff and whose patience for standing at the stove is short, 20 minutes is the threshold. If a meal takes longer, it will not get made at all, and the person eats crackers instead. Papas con chorizo exist to prevent that. Number 10, sopa de habas con nopales. Dried fava beans and diced cactus paddle cooked together in a chile guajillo broth. The habas break down into a thick base, and the nopales add a bright, slightly tart contrast. 1 dried chili, a handful of dried habas, 1 nopal paddle, water. That is the cost. In Tlaxcala and the highlands of Puebla, this soup was the cold season staple of farming families who grew both ingredients in their own fields. Everything came from the land, and nothing came from a store. For a senior living alone, sopa de habas con nopales provides fiber and iron, and vitamin C in a single bowl. The fava beans keep the body full for hours, and the nopales help regulate blood sugar. This is a meal that takes care of the body while your body is busy taking care of itself. Everything in the pot grew from the ground, and everything in the pot goes to work the moment you swallow. Number 9, chile atole, spicy corn masa soup. This meal is so old, Hernan Cortés documented its existence when the Spanish arrived in Mexico. Corn masa dissolved in water with fresh corn kernels, green chilies, and the herb epazote. The result is a thick, porridge-like soup that tastes deeply of corn and heat. It required nothing that a campesino family did not already have. Corn, chile, and water. No meat, no purchased ingredients, no trip to the market. In Puebla and Tlaxcala, chile atole is still made during the rainy season when fresh corn is available, though fewer people make it every year. For a senior living alone, chile atole is a meal from ingredients that cost almost nothing. The masa provides energy, the chile provides warmth, and the epazote settles the stomach. The recipe is over 500 years old. It has kept people alive through conquests, revolutions, and famines. Now here is the truth of it. It can keep you alive through a Tuesday. There is a particular kind of silence in the kitchen of a person who lives alone. No conversation over the meal, no voice asking for seconds, no sound except the spoon against the bowl and the clock on the wall. That silence is why so many seniors stop cooking. It is not the effort, it is the audience. When no one else is eating, the meal feels like it does not matter, but it does matter. These one-pot meals were designed for that exact situation. One pot, one burner, one bowl, one person. That is not loneliness, that is self-sufficiency. That is a human being deciding that they are worth the trouble of heating oil, chopping an onion, and waiting for a pot to simmer. That decision, your decision, is the meal. Number 8, sopa tarasca, from the Purepecha people of Michoacan. The soup looks and tastes like a restaurant dish. It is not. It is a poverty dish made from the cheapest ingredients in any Mexican kitchen. The bean puree gives it a velvety texture that tricks the palate into thinking something expensive is happening. The ancho chile provides a smoky depth. The tortilla strips on top add crunch. For a senior living alone, sopa tarasca is the meal that proves you as a single cook in a small kitchen can produce something beautiful. That beauty matters because it reminds the cook that eating alone does not mean eating poorly. A pot of sopa tarasca on the stove means your kitchen still produces things worth sitting down for. That is not a small thing. For someone who eats most meals standing at the counter, sitting down for sopa tarasca is an event. Number 7, caldo de pollo con hierba santa, 1 chicken leg, a pot of water, hierba santa, the large leaf that smells like anise and root beer, and something else that nobody can name. In southern Mexico, in Oaxaca and Veracruz, caldo de pollo con hierba santa was the sick day meal. The leaf was believed to settle the stomach, ease headaches, and restore energy. Whether those claims were true or not does not matter. You simmer one chicken leg for 45 minutes with yerba santa, a chunk of onion, and a pinch of salt. For a senior living alone, this caldo is the closest thing to being taken care of. Nobody is bringing the soup on a tray. But making it, smelling the yerba santa fill the apartment, ladling it into a bowl, that ritual is your caretaker. The soup does what you cannot always do for yourself. It says the body is worth healing. Number 6, mole de olla. Mole de olla, beef and vegetable stew. Chunks of beef, corn on the cob, zucchini, chayote, and green beans, simmered in a broth made from dried ancho and guajillo chiles, epazote, and zoconostle, the sour cactus fruit. This is the most complex meal on this list, and it is still made in one pot. In central Mexico, mole de olla was the Sunday meal of families who could afford a small piece of beef and nothing more. The chiles and vegetables stretched the meat across 8 bowls. A piece of beef that cost 50 pesos became a pot of food that fed a family for 2 days. For a senior living alone, mole de olla requires more effort than most meals on this list. But it produces more food. 1 pot of mole de olla makes 5 to 6 servings. That is nearly a week of lunches from a single Sunday afternoon of cooking. The effort pays for itself in days of eating without cooking. Number 5, arroz con leche salado. Not the sweet version, but the savory arroz con leche for one. White rice cooked in milk instead of water with a pinch of salt and sometimes a little butter. The milk makes the rice creamy and rich without adding meat or vegetables. 1 cup of rice and 2 cups of milk. That was dinner. It is your meal of last resort that does not taste like last resort. It tastes like something someone made on purpose. The milk has to be stirred or it scorches. That stirring is the whole recipe. 5 minutes of standing at the stove, moving a spoon through hot milk and rice, watching the grains swell and the liquid thicken. For a senior living alone, those 5 minutes of stirring are not a chore. They are a meditation. They are proof that your hands still work and your kitchen still matters. Number 4, caldo de albondigas. Small meatballs made from ground beef mixed with rice, egg, and mint, simmered in a tomato broth with potatoes and carrots. This is the most comforting soup in Mexican cooking, and everyone's grandmother, yours too, made a version of it. The mint is what makes it. Without mint, it is meatball soup. With mint, it is caldo de albondigas. In Chihuahua and Sonora, grandmothers made this on the coldest days of winter. A 1/4 kilogram of ground beef stretched with rice and egg produced enough meatballs for a pot that fed 3 people. For a senior cooking alone, the meatballs can be made in a batch, frozen individually, and dropped into broth whenever the craving hits. That is the engineering of solo cooking. Make once, eat many times. That is the motto of every grandmother who ever fed a family on a budget. It works just as well for one. Sopa de migas, breadcrumb soup. A meal so humble, so deeply tied to the bottom of the economic ladder that it has almost completely vanished. Sometimes an egg was cracked into the broth near the end for protein. The bread softened into something halfway between soup and porridge. The garlic and chile gave it flavor. The egg gave it substance. The whole pot cost less than the coins at the bottom of a purse. Bakers in Puebla and Guanajuato used to give away yesterday's bread for free. Families collected it. Sopa de migas was what happened when free stale bread met a woman who refused to let her family go to bed hungry. Almost no one under 60 has ever eaten it. Almost no one under 60 knows it existed. But it fed thousands of families who didn't have anything else and asked for nothing in return. Number 2, pozole blanco de rancho, not the red pozole from restaurants, not the green pozole from Guerrero, the white one, the ranch version, pork, hominy, water, onion, garlic, and salt. Nothing else in the pot. The broth is clear, and the hominy swells until it pops open like white flowers. In the ranchos of Jalisco and Nayarit, pozole blanco was the Saturday meal that grandmothers started cooking on Friday night. The toppings went on at the table. Shredded cabbage, diced onion, dried oregano, a squeeze of lime, and a tostada on the side. For a senior living alone, pozole blanco is a project. It takes time and patience and your willingness to let the pot do the work through the night. But the reward is extraordinary. A pot of pozole blanco feeds one person for 4 to 5 days. That is nearly a week of eating from a single evening of cooking. The pot does the labor. The person does the eating. Number 1, caldo de res de rancho. Caldo de res is simple. Beef bone, water, corn on the cob, potatoes, carrots, cabbage, chayote, and a branch of cilantro. The vegetables went in stages, the hardest first, the softest last. One beef bone cost about 30 pesos, and the vegetables cost about 50 pesos. Those 80 pesos of ingredients produced a pot of caldo that lasted 5 days for a single person. 5 days, from one pot, from one afternoon of cooking. The smell alone was worth it. Cilantro and simmering bone and cabbage softening in the steam. Still alive, still worth feeding. For a senior living alone, caldo de res de rancho is the ultimate meal. It is the meal that says, I am still here. The stove is on, the pot is full, your house smells like broth and cilantro, and somebody who cares enough to cook, even if that somebody is the same person who will eat it. That pot of caldo is not just food, it is a declaration, and the bones that made the broth carry more strength than any bone in the body that drinks it. She never missed a week. When her husband died, she kept making it. When her children moved to Guadalajara, she kept making it. Because the caldo was never for anyone else, it was for her. It was her proof that Sunday still mattered. Cook. One of these this week, just one. Buy a handful of dried lentils and a plantain. Buy a beef bone and some vegetables. Heat a pot of water and make something real. Don't eat from a bag tonight. Sit down at the table, not the couch. Set a place. Use a real bowl. Eat slowly. Because these meals were never about being cheap. They were about being alive. They are about saying your body matters enough to feed it something that came from a stove, something that took time and heat and care, even if the care came from your own hands. Tell me in the comments which of these 25 meals brings back a memory. Tell me if your abuela made any of them. I want to know if the fideo gets more love than the pozole. I want to know if anyone else's grandmother could make a meal from 3 potatoes and a dried chili that tasted better than anything in a restaurant. Because these are not just recipes. They are proof that the simplest food made in one pot, eaten alone, can still be an act of dignity.